The Vice President of the United States flying into Bogota, Colombia today to meet with leaders of the Lima Group, including the President of Colombia and the interim president, the man the United States of America and most of the free world recognizes as the President of Venezuela, Juan Guaido. Both Juan Guaido and Vice President Mike Pence also met with families, Venezuelans today, that are living in exile here in Colombia. I can tell you I was there in the room and it got very emotional with some women sobbing. They are desperate, they said, to go home, and they've waited long enough, and they are so hopeful for change and so hopeful that finally they will get some freedom. But it's challenging, and Nicolas Maduro has really not made things any easier. Just over the weekend, we learned that 5 people have died. Hundreds have been injured in all kinds of skirmishes along the border, specifically on the Venezuelan-Colombia border and also on the Brazilian-Colombian border. That's where we're seeing these violent outbreaks as Nicolas Maduro prevents this much-needed food and medicine from getting to his people. He is refusing them that opportunity of the humanitarian aid, not just from the United States, but from all over the world. It is being sent in, and he would rather see it set on fire than get to the people that need it the most. The world is watching. The world cares, especially the United States of America. Here is my exclusive interview with the Vice President, Mike Pence. Well, welcome. It's good to see you this time in Bogota. A lot's been going on.
Thank you, Trish.
A lot over the last couple days. And I know that the U.S. has expressed all its support. You just said that for Juan Guaido, but Maduro's still there. And he's not letting his people have access to things like food and medicine that we're sending and other countries are sending. So what do you do now?
President Trump asked me to be here on short notice to meet with nations that came together more than a year ago on what came to be known as the Lima Group to isolate Venezuela's dictatorship economically and diplomatically. And in the wake of the brutality this weekend, where literally the dictator Maduro was dancing in Caracas at the same time that his henchmen were burning truckloads of food and medicine, I believe has only steeled the resolve of the nations across this hemisphere and around the world to stand strong in our conviction that Nicolas Maduro is a usurper. He has no legitimate claim to power, and Nicolas Maduro must go.
Okay, I hear you, but how do you get from there to him actually getting on a plane and leaving? And making room for the interim president, Juan Guaido, and free elections?
Well, this is all a process. And from the first days of this administration, President Trump made it clear that the United States of America was going to stand strong for freedom in Venezuela. We've sanctioned more than 50 individuals in the Maduro regime. In recent months, we actually sanctioned Venezuela's oil company, PDVSA. And today we called on nations across our hemisphere to join us in sanctioning the principal source of revenue for the Maduro dictatorship, and that is the oil stream that comes from PDVSA. But we announced today additional sanctions. More nations today are recognizing the legitimate president of Venezuela is President Juan Guaido. And I truly do believe that despite the brutality of this last weekend, where 5 innocent civilians were murdered, where truckloads of medicine and food were burned, that the momentum is on the side of freedom. The momentum is on the side of those precious families I just met with, that soon freedom will be restored in Venezuela. And the millions who have fled oppression and deprivation will finally come home.
Where's China on this? Where's Russia on this?
We called today on nations that have been standing with the Maduro regime in the wake of the brutality this weekend to reconsider their position, to no longer be willing to endorse a regime that literally murders civilians, that dispatches henchmen that have been trained by paramilitary personnel from Cuba who literally opened fire on civilians this last weekend, and to say we urge nations around the world who've been willing to stand with Maduro to step back, to look at what happened this weekend, to look at the rise of the freedom movement within Venezuela all across this hemisphere, all across the world, and join with us.
I mean, do you feel that there is some dialogue that can be had? I think it's important and noteworthy that we haven't seen Vladimir Putin out grandstanding and saying, you know, I'm with Maduro. But nonetheless, we haven't heard him say, I'm with the U.S. on this. And historically, he has always been Maduro's supporter. So how does that change?
Well, first, as I said today, and President Trump has made clear, there can be no bystanders in the cause of freedom in Venezuela. Today, we called on Mexico and Uruguay and the nations of the Eastern Caribbean now to join other nations in this hemisphere, to come off the sidelines and recognize that the time has come to end the suffering, the deprivation, and the oppression of the Venezuelan people, and to stand with their duly elected National Assembly, and to stand with their constitutionally recognized interim president. And as that continues to build, as we continue even today to see nations around the world joining us, we hope that nations that thus far have been willing to stand with the Maduro regime will reconsider, will step back when they think about the impact that this is having on real lives, on everyday Venezuelans. But also, what President Trump has made clear is a failed state knows no boundaries. And it's absolutely imperative that we see freedom and democracy and the rule of law restored in Venezuela, so that it cannot be a platform for narco-terrorists. It cannot be a platform for exporting violence across Central America and into the United States. That's our purpose here, is to stand for freedom, as we always have as America, but we're also standing for the security and the interest of all the nations of this region.
It's an important point. When people have asked me, you know, why should Americans care so much about Venezuela? I mean, from a humanitarian standpoint, I think it's pretty obvious when you see all the destruction that regime has caused, but also from just a selfish viewpoint, in that this is a country that's right next door to us, and we don't want that kind of lawlessness and criminal activity and becoming a breeding ground for other things. But
what we see in the Maduro regime is a dictatorship. Demonstrated its brutality this weekend. It's essentially a puppet of the dictatorship in Cuba. He maintains power through violence and intimidation. And the American people have always stood for freedom, but make no mistake about it, that oppression, the starvation that is besetting millions, has caused 3 million people to flee from Venezuela, maybe 2 million more before the end of the year. That's driven the largest mass migration in the history of our hemisphere. And under President Trump's leadership, the United States is absolutely determined to stand strong with the duly elected National Assembly, the legitimate president of Venezuela, Juan Guaido, and to continue to stand firm with them until liberty and the rule of law are reestablished.
The world is closing in on him. Why doesn't he go? Why is he still there? And let me ask you this. Is there any talk of military action, any talk of us engaging with the Colombians or the Brazilians to force him out?
Well, President Trump has made it clear that while we hope for a peaceful transition, we hope that diplomatic and economic pressure and the voice of nations around the world will result in a peaceful transition. All options are on the table.
Did you discuss military action today?
We're simply not going to allow a regime that terrorizes and oppresses and brings such deprivation and poverty to its people to continue to prevail in this hemisphere. We're going to stand strong, but we really do believe that the momentum is on the side of the freedom-loving people of Venezuela. When you look at the family of nations that are coming together almost every day, we do believe that by continuing to put more economic pressure on the Maduro regime and also sending a very clear message which the President had me do so today, to members of the armed forces, that the United States of America stands with President Guaido and the government. We're prepared to extend amnesty and embrace any members of the armed forces of Venezuela, who now almost 200 have defected, to come to essentially come forward to embrace freedom and the rule of law in their nation.
They're afraid to, though.
But we've made it clear.
They're afraid to, because they feel like if I do this, then I've got a good shot at those colectivos, you know, tracking me down and hurting me and my family. And so he has manipulated that population with fear. What is it that you can do, the U.S., the world can do to say, hey, it's okay? I mean, I know you're expressing that message, but I think it's hard to get out to everyone there because of his stronghold.
Our message is very simple. To the people of Venezuela, including members of the armed forces, the United States of America stands with you if you will stand for freedom.
Okay.
That it's time. It's time for members of the armed forces to look aside from the mask-wearing terrorists that make their way through the streets and threaten violence, to look aside from the brutality of the Maduro regime, to think of their children, to think of their families, to think of their country and their future, and to step forward and to become a part of a movement that I believe with all of my heart will soon bring freedom to the people of Venezuela.
You say that this is a movement, and it's gaining so much traction, and there's so much energy right now. How long does that energy last in view of the sanctions? Because you have people that are starving, that are, you know, desperate for food, desperate enough to sign up and promise Maduro that they'll vote for him if they can just get a box of food to feed their family for a week. So in this interim period, while you're waiting for him to make the right decision and take his exit, stage left, what happens to the people that are suffering under the sanctions?
Well, the United States has shipped hundreds of tons of aid, and I spoke today to President Duque about moving more resources to the border of Venezuela, pre-positioning food and medicine. We'll continue to press to see that aid make its way in to the country. But make no mistake about it, the United States of America, our allies across this region, in the Lima Group, and frankly allies in this cause around the world, are not waiting. We're going to continue to bring more pressure to bear, more economic pressure to bear, more diplomatic pressure to bear on the Maduro regime. And I believe with all of my heart that the day will come when Venezuela will once again be free.
Oh, the people would love it. Let me ask you, what's going to happen to the 5 Americans that are being held and have been given no trial, no court date by the Maduro regime? What will happen to the 5 American hostages?
We demand justice for any American that is incarcerated anywhere in the world. And President Trump sent a very clear message a week ago that the Maduro regime should understand that any violence against Americans in Venezuela, any violence against President Guaido or his family or other opposition leaders, any violence against people that are simply standing in the streets to peacefully protest for freedom will not be tolerated by the United States of America and our allies.
What does that mean, will not be tolerated?
We're going to continue to stand strong. And Trish, I have to tell you, I couldn't be more proud of the leadership that President Trump has brought to the world stage on behalf of freedom in our hemisphere in Venezuela. Literally from the outset of this administration, President Trump made it clear that the collapse of Venezuela into dictatorship and oppression and deprivation was unacceptable to this administration. And he's marshaled the resources of the United States. He's marshaled the economic power of the United States. He's called together the world community. And we will continue to do that until Venezuela is once again free.
Just one technical question before you go. Juan Guaido was not allowed out of the country. Maduro said, you can't go. He went anyway, and he's here with you today. But he's going back, and he needs to go back. The people want to see him there, and he needs to lead that movement. How does he get back in? And how does he not wind up getting picked up and thrown in prison by Maduro, who says, you violated the rules?
The leadership that interim President Juan Guaido has shown is truly inspiring. His willingness to come and to stand with Venezuelan people outside the country, to stand with a convoy of aid and medicine and demand that it be brought into the nation, was an act of personal courage. And as he returns to Venezuela, we're confident he'll continue to demonstrate the same courage that he's demonstrated throughout, to continue to stand firm. And as he stands firm, the United States of America will stand with him.